Hey, 801. We're continuing to read from this book, The Omnivore's Dilemma. The focus of today's lesson is going to be on author's purpose. Now, what is an author's purpose? An author's purpose is his or her reason for writing, which may be to entertain, inform, or persuade the reader, typically. So, those are the three purposes that we are going to focus on. And if you haven't already, please make sure that you watch all three of these videos. And this video in particular is going to talk about the author's purpose and what it means to persuade, entertain, and inform. But I'm going to go over that with you very briefly once again. So, one purpose can be to entertain, which is pretty self explanatory. And how you know that the author's purpose is to entertain is when the author uses the five senses to paint a picture for the reader. And this writing typically incorporates imagery and very specific details. And when doing so, when you look out for those specific things, you can determine that the author's purpose was to entertain. And I also want you to keep in mind that sometimes an author can have more than one of these purposes. And then to persuade, it means to attempt to influence the reader to believe something. So you're trying to persuade the reader to believe that something is true, or you're trying to pretty much get the reader to believe, uh, to see your point of view on something and to agree with you, right? It's pretty much to try to influence or get the reader to believe something or to think a certain way. And then lastly, to inform is simply to explain the subject to the reader. You can think of informing as simply as giving the reader information about something, and when the purpose to inform, when the purpose is to inform, it's pretty much unbiased, right? There are no feelings associated with it. It's simply you're giving the information to the reader and not trying to get the reader to believe one point of view over another. All right. So I'm going to model to you how to determine the author's purpose by reading this section over here, at the bottom over here, up until here. And we want to use evidence when we determine what the author's purpose is. For your classwork for today, you are going to read from Frankenseeds to that whole section at the bottom of page 35 all the way to the bottom of page 36, and you're going to determine the author's purpose. And once again, I want you to pay attention to how we pay close attention to certain phrases that are used, the way the author presents certain information to determine what the purpose is. All right, so before we read, let's just quickly review what hybrid corn is, because that's what it talks about here. So previously, before farmers started using, before hybrid corn was used, farmers had to get their own seed. And then seed companies came up with a new kind of corn seed, which is hybrid corn. So it's when you have one type of corn who has certain traits, and then another corn that has different traits or attributes. And think of those two that come together, that they marry and have kids, and then the corn that is produced kind of is like a combination of the traits that both those different corn plants had. So what happens as a result? The children of that crop will be mixed. Some plants will be like the hybrid parents, but most will not. So it's going to have the traits of both the parent corn seeds. So now in this section that I'm going to read to you over here, it's going to talk more about what happens as a result of hybrid corn being used. Hybrid corn quadrupled the yields of farmers from about 20 bushels per acre to about 80 bushels per acre. So what is a bushel? One bushel of corn is 56 pounds of kernels. So that's about the size of an extra large bag of dog food. So already we see that, um, hybrid corn uh, resulted in much more corn being produced per acre. This was the beginning of a major change in the way farmers operated and the way we get our food. In a way, it was the beginning of the industrial food chain. The secret of modern corn hybrids, is that they can be planted very close together. Before hybrids, a farmer could plant 8,000 corn plants in an acre. Today, George can grow 30,000 plants in an acre. So already twice we see that they're comparing how much could be grown before hybrids versus how much could be grown after hybrids. They said it here and they said it here. So already we're getting an idea of what the author's purpose is. Maybe they're persuading us that, or trying to get us to believe that hybrids are a more efficient way of growing corn. Today, George can grow 30,000 plants in an acre. Hybrids have been bred for thicker stalks and stronger root systems, the better to stand upright in a crowd. This also makes it possible to harvest them with large machines. Basically, the plants live in a city of corn, crowded together in neat rows. New hybrids have increased from farm yields to about 180 bushels per acre. One bushel holds 56 pounds of kernels, so 180 bushels is slightly more than 10,000 pounds of food per acre. The field George and I planted that day would produce 1.8 million pounds of corn. Not bad for a day's work sitting down, I thought to myself. So, if I think about the author's purpose for this section, I would say that it is to persuade. Author is persuading us that hybrid corn is the more efficient and effective way of growing corn. All right. So now we have determined the author's purpose. Now, let's look back at some evidence that helps us determine that that was the author's purpose. We can highlight this very first sentence. Hybrid corn quadrupled the yields of farmers from about 20 bushels per acre to about 80 bushels per acre. Right? That is one good piece of evidence right here, because usually when you see an author do a compare and contrast to make you think that one thing is better than the other, that's how you know that the author's persuading us, right? Remember, persuade means to influence the reader. He's trying to influence the reader by making us believe that hybrid corn is more effective, right, than when farmers had to get their own seed, right? Let's look for one more piece of evidence. All right, that this last sentence right here is a good one. The field George and I planted that day would produce 1.8 million pounds of corn. All right, so this was as a result of using hybrids. All right, once again, I'm actually going to highlight one more where it says before hybrids, a farmer could plant 8,000 corn plants in an acre. Today, George can grow 30,000 plants in an acre. Once again, we see a little compare and contrast there to show how hybrids are better, right? How more corn plants can be planted now since using hybrids as opposed to before when farmers had to get their own seed. All right, so for your independent practice today, your exit ticket, you're going to read, once again, I said from here to here, and you are going to determine the author's purpose and use evidence to support your response. All right, is the author's purpose to entertain, to persuade, or to inform? All right, and I'm going to give you a hint. It could actually be more than one of those. All right, if it is more than one of those, I want you to give a piece of evidence that explains to support your response for each purpose. All right. So if the author's purpose is, for example, to entertain, I want you to use a piece of evidence from the text that shows how the author's purpose is to entertain. Make sure you're also explaining in your own words. And same thing for any other's purpose that it might have. All right. And I hope this makes it clear for you. And that is all for today.